Hey guys, tonight we're taking a cozy, meandering walk back in time, around 400,000 years or so, to meet a species you've heard about, probably joked about, but never really met. You picture a lumbering brute with a club and a unibrow, right? That's cute, but wrong. Neanderthals were actually human 2.0 before it was cool. Tougher, more cold-proof, and way more emotionally complex than pop culture ever gave them credit for. Imagine a survivalist who could build a fire blindfolded, knew how to hunt a mammoth with teamwork, and maybe, just maybe, could sing a lullaby in a language we'll never decode. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there in your little corner of the night. Now, dim the lights, maybe open the window for that soft wind-blowing sound, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by walking through tall grasses, somewhere in Ice Age Europe. The air smells of pine sap and distant fire. A shadow moves across the rocks. It's not a bear, it's not a wolf. It's someone like you, but not quite. You meet their gaze. Their eyes are deep set, intelligent, even a little sad. Their brow is heavy and the nose broad, perfect for warming, freezing air. Neanderthals, not monsters, not missing links. Just another version of us, one that took a different path through the wilderness of history. You pause beside a boulder, picturing that moment when scientists in the 19th century first unearthed these ancient bones in the Neander Valley of Germany. They were stunned. Here were the remains of a being so like us that it challenged the whole tidy story of evolution. Early debates had Victorian gentlemen practically fainting into their tea. Were these diseased humans? Or some primitive cousin we didn't know about? Turns out they were neither. Neanderthals weren't some poorly made prototype. They were a fully realized branch of humanity, specialized for surviving the coldest, roughest climates Earth had to offer. Think of them like the all-terrain vehicle of the human family tree. You're the Prius. They roamed vast stretches of Eurasia, from the Atlantic coasts of Portugal all the way into the mountains of Siberia. That's a lot of ground to cover when you're wearing furs and walking barefoot through snow half the year. You can almost hear the crunch of their footfalls over frosty moss, the crack of distant antlers, the hush before a spear hits its mark. Now, most people imagine Neanderthals as these grunting cavemen dragging clubs and screaming at the sky. But that's about as accurate as assuming all medieval peasants spoke in Cockney accents and ate only porridge. Neanderthals had culture, tools, family bonds. They buried their dead, sometimes with flowers. They had rituals. They lived in communities tight-knit enough to care for the elderly and injured long past their hunting prime. In fact, one skeleton found in Shanidar Cave in Iraq showed a man who'd lost the use of one arm, had a withered leg, and was partially blind, but lived for years. Someone fed him, protected him, maybe even listened to his stories by firelight. You picture it, embers crackling, shadows dancing on stone, and a group of weary travelers leaning in close to hear the old man speak in rough, throaty tones. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals had language as complex as ours. Some say yes, they had the anatomical toolkit for speech. Others say their communication was more about tone and gesture. But honestly, you don't need a perfect subjunctive tense to warn someone a saber-tooth is about to pounce. Here's a fringe theory to ponder while you're sinking into the pillows. Some researchers believe Neanderthals may have been the first to use musical tones to communicate. Think low humming signals through forest fog. If that's true, your great-great-great prehistoric uncle was basically doing Ice Age beatboxing. Respect. And remember, these weren't some rare, exotic beings hiding in caves. They were everywhere, for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than Homo sapiens have been around. Statistically speaking, Neanderthals had a better run than we've had, so far. You imagine walking into a shallow cave in southern France, the air rich with fire smoke and animal fat. You see the soot-stained hands of a Neanderthal pressing against the stone wall, not just to make art, but maybe to say, I was here. And now, thousands of years later, here you are, listening, wondering, breathing the same kind of air. So next time someone tries to insult your intelligence by calling you a Neanderthal, thank them. Because those ancient cousins of yours were smart enough to survive some of the worst environmental conditions Earth ever threw at humans. And they did it without Wi-Fi. You lean a little closer to the glow of the fire, and now you notice something in those strong Neanderthal hands. Not just raw meat or rough stones, but precision. The stereotype says they were all brute force and bone clubs, but that's lazy thinking. What you're seeing here is finesse. The delicate twist of a wrist, the careful chipping of flint against antler. They weren't just whacking rocks together. They were crafting tools with such fine control, you'd think they'd apprenticed under a Renaissance sculptor. You watch as one of them sharpens a Mousterian point, a type of tool so standardized, it makes modern factory lines look inconsistent. Each edge, each angle, designed not for show, but for survival, slicing through tendons, scraping hides, splitting marrow-rich bones. This wasn't just bashing things into shape, this was technology. Stone Age tech, yes, but tech nonetheless. And they didn't stop there. They were heat-treating stone to improve sharpness, using adhesives like birch tar to haft points onto wooden shafts. That's glue. They made glue in the Ice Age. Your roommate still can't fix a loose shelf without asking for help. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals developed these tool innovations independently or borrowed a few tricks from Homo sapiens' neighbors. But here's the twist. Homo sapiens might have learned just as much from them. It wasn't a one-way street. This was a time of parallel evolution, like two rival chefs perfecting their signature recipes across the same valley. And about that birch tar, you'll love this. Making it requires a controlled burn of bark in low oxygen conditions, which basically means they were running prehistoric chemistry experiments in underground ovens. Your high school science fair project suddenly seems quaint. You're watching this one Neanderthal now, crouched low, tongue peeking out the side of their mouth in concentration. They strike the stone just so, revealing a razor-sharp flake. Their hands move quickly, trained by years of repetition. These tools aren't just for hunting. They're used for hide scraping, woodworking, even plant processing. You realize this isn't a monster at work. It's a craftsman, an artisan, maybe even a perfectionist. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. In one archaeological site in the Netherlands, scientists found what looks suspiciously like a Neanderthal toothpick, a sliver of bone or wood used to clean between the teeth. Imagine the scene. A long day of hunting, the fire's crackling. Someone leans back and sighs, pokes between their molars, and mutters something equivalent to, "Ugh, mammoth sinew again." And speaking of fire, they didn't just stumble across it. They kept it alive, maybe even started it. Evidence suggests they carried embers from site to site, nesting them in special bundles of bark and moss. The original camping pros. There's even some speculation that they struck sparks from pyrite and flint. Primitive lighters, if you will. That's not dumb luck. That's planning. You shift your weight, letting your shoulders sink a little deeper. The rhythm of flint napping slows, becomes almost hypnotic. The flakes fall like snow. You imagine how quiet those icy landscapes were, and how important this little tap 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 must have been. A signal that life was continuing. Tools meant meat. Meat meant survival. And survival meant another sunrise. The more you look, the more you see this thread of intention running through everything they did. They didn't just make tools, they passed down knowledge across generations, which means they taught each other. They remembered. Maybe they even innovated, improved on what their parents did. This wasn't instinct, it was legacy. And if you're wondering how they even knew what materials to use, here's where it gets even cooler. They sourced specific stones from faraway places, meaning they either traveled or traded for quality. One cave site shows evidence of flint that originated over 100 kilometers away. That's like hiking to the next country just for a better kitchen knife. You imagine yourself on that trek now, the wind cutting across your face, a leather sling heavy with stones thumping against your back. There's purpose in every step. You are not just walking. You are forging a link in a chain that began before written language, before cities, before history even knew how to record itself. And here is a quiet joke for you as you fade towards sleep. Modern humans lose their minds when the internet S down for 5 minutes. Neanderthals survived with nothing but sticks, stones, and the sheer will to thrive during the Ice Age. Who's the real tech support here? You glance again at that flint tool, so simple, yet so clever. A silent symbol of a people who refuse to die dumb. And even now, as you drift, you feel it, that faint pulse of recognition. Not just awe, but kinship. Because somewhere, tucked in your DNA, is the memory of that toolmaker crouched beside the fire. You let yourself sink deeper now, pulled along by the gentle weight of ancient brains, massive, strange, and humming with mystery. Neanderthal skulls were thick and broad, like a helmet molded straight from evolution's workshop, and inside, a brain even larger than yours. Yep, bigger, not by a mile, but enough to make you blink, or yawn, softly impressed. It's a quiet kind of irony. Neanderthals had more raw cranial volume than modern humans, especially in the back of the brain, which might have meant stronger visual processing, more spatial awareness, and serious muscle control. Think, 3D maps, every rock memorized, every escape route clear, all while calculating wind direction mid-spear throw. Basically, a wilderness GPS with built-in motion capture. Not bad for someone who never used a calendar. But here's the part that tickles the science community's mustache hairs. Historians still argue whether that extra brainpower actually made them smarter. Intelligence isn't just size. It's wiring, adaptability, processing power. And in the test of time, it was Homo sapiens who built pyramids and iPhones, not Neanderthals. So the debate hums on, like a low background buzz in the anthropology labs. You tilt your head, imagining what it feels like to carry that much thought behind your eyes. A heavier skull, sure, but maybe also a heavier awareness. Neanderthals seem to have noticed everything. The angle of sunlight on moss, the silent tension of a herd just before the stampede. Maybe they didn't need cities, because the wilderness was their city. And here's where things get cozy strange. Their brains might have been optimized not for abstract thinking like ours, but for physicality, emotion, and memory. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly remember how it smells, how it feels. That might have been their normal operating mode, fully present, fully attuned, no mindless scrolling, no disassociating in traffic, just pure moment-to-moment awareness, blissful, and a little exhausting. Picture one of them now, squatting by a river, staring at the shifting light on water, not just because it's pretty, but because those ripples mean trout, and trout mean protein, and protein means your kids don't starve this week. Every sight and sound was loaded with consequence. Their brains had to juggle weather patterns, terrain changes, predator migration, and social dynamics all at once. No wonder they were built like tanks. A quirky tidbit for your sleepy head. One analysis of Neanderthal brain regions suggests they might have had enhanced capacities for empathy and emotional processing. That's right. These so-called brutes may have felt deeply, loved deeply, mourned, grieved, smiled, maybe even giggled. You ever seen someone laugh so hard they wheeze? Imagine that, 50,000 years ago, beside a fire made from dry mammoth dung. You hear it now, a kind of prehistoric exhale, maybe a chuckle. Something went right during the hunt today, and one of them made a face, or fell, or said something just ridiculous enough to break the tension. Laughter rolls through the camp like a gentle earthquake, and for a moment, they're not surviving, they're living. That's the thing. You're not floating through a museum exhibit. You're walking through lives. They were born, grew up, learned, failed, succeeded, aged, and died. Some were probably bad at math. Others were excellent at making those weird little birch tar bundles. One might have been the go-to for fixing broken spears. Another, the one who hummed while skinning rabbits. A community built on memory, shared skill, and quiet mutual care. And here's a mindbender for your dreams. Some researchers now believe Neanderthals may have had a kind of proto-theory of mind. That is, they understood that other people had thoughts, feelings, and intentions different from their own. which means empathy, planning, maybe even deception. You picture one little Neanderthal kid pretending to be asleep to avoid chores. Some things never change. But for all their intelligence, you feel a little pressure in your chest, because that brain also came with burdens. Neanderthals didn't write, didn't record, didn't leave behind libraries. Everything they knew was stored in minds that died with them. Imagine the weight of carrying all that knowledge generation to generation, person to person, like passing fire from one torch to the next without ever letting it go out. And when they did start to vanish, when that last cluster of Neanderthals dwindled in some remote valley, those torches began to flicker. You let out a breath. The wind outside your window sounds like it might have sounded then. Cool, steady, full of invisible things. Maybe their minds didn't need myths or mathematics. Maybe the real poetry was in the way they moved through a world that tried, again and again, to kill them, and didn't succeed for hundreds of thousands of years. So as you drift now, think of that heavy brain not as wasted potential, but as a lantern in the dark. It lit the path for a version of humanity you're still connected to, by blood, by bone, and maybe by some strange flicker of memory still hiding in your dreams. The cave mouth yawns open, and you follow them in, not out of curiosity, but because this is home, not a temporary shelter, not a pit stop during migration. This shadowy space of echo and firelight is where life happens. You can almost feel the cool, damp breath of the limestone walls, hear the soft scuffle of bare feet on dust-smooth stone. There's soot on the ceiling, bones by the hearth, and something else tucked into the corners. Intention. Because for Neanderthals, caves weren't just natural cover. They were memory holders, shelters for storms, and maybe for stories. You notice how the space is divided, loosely but meaningfully. Sleeping spots, work areas, places for butchering, perhaps even a nursery nook near the warmer wall. It's not random, it's not just survival, it's structure. And it gives you a strange kind of déjà vu, like walking through the earliest open-plan living room. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals returned seasonally to the same caves year after year, generation after generation. But the evidence suggests deep familiarity, reused hearths, layers of debris, traces of wear on the stone floors. These weren't strangers to their shelters, they were locals. This was their address, their neighborhood, maybe even their sacred ground, and that's when you spot it. A handprint on the wall, dusted in red ochre. It's not decorative. It's not even clear if it was meant to last. But it did, through collapse and flood and time's greedy fingers. It's there, and it says one thing in the most ancient language. I was here. There's a fringe theory, softly whispered in the halls of anthropology, that these marks weren't just idle smears. Some scholars think Neanderthals had the beginnings of symbolic thought, not writing exactly, but expression. Art, the prelude to culture. You can almost hear one of them explaining it, in the way you might talk about a childhood drawing on the fridge. It just felt right to put it there. And if you're raising your eyebrows about Neanderthal art, don't worry. So did scientists. But then came those Spanish cave findings. Stenciled hands, abstract shapes, maybe even a ladder-like symbol. And radiocarbon dating, older than the arrival of Homo sapiens in the area, which means, yep, Neanderthals might have beaten us to the mural game. Picasso in a loincloth. Here's your quirky tidbit. One cave in France held a strange collection. Eagle talons, carefully collected, some even modified. Not tools, not food. So why? Decoration, ceremony, some kind of proto-jewelry? Imagine them threading claws onto sinew, tying it around a wrist or neck. Not to show off, just to feel powerful, or lucky, or seen. You follow a faint glimmer deeper into the cave. The fire has burned low, but not out. Around it, they gather, sharing food, or stories, or silence. It's easy to forget how much communication happens in quiet moments. The glance, the sigh, the half smile that says, "You did good today." Neanderthals didn't need complex grammar to be complex people. Their language, whatever it was, worked. And oh yes, they had language. That's not just bedtime legend. It's increasingly likely, thanks to a little bone in their throat called the hyoid. That bone supports speech, and theirs looks familiar. Paired with their brain structure, ear bones, and breath control, it's a good bet they could talk. Maybe not Shakespeare, but definitely survival, love, danger, grief. The basics, the big stuff. Imagine the cadence of it. Gruff consonants, rhythmic hums, maybe a chant or two passed down like recipes. A mother teaching her child the right tone for stay back from the cliff. A friend whispering a joke while chewing marrow. A pair of hunters planning silently with just 2 grunts and a look. You pause at the edge of their circle, not wanting to intrude. But no one notices you. Not because you're not real, but because you're already part of it. You're inside the memory now. You're listening to the fire crackle and the wind sigh, and someone softly hum while weaving sinew through leather. There's comfort here. Real, aching comfort. Not in what they had, but in how they used it. A cave, a fire, each other. What more does a brain, large or small, really need? Oh, and for your midnight smirk, remember that old joke about men not asking for directions? Well, Neanderthals might have been the first ones to break that trend. Some cave sites suggest they mapped out paths, marked trails with natural symbols, even returned to resource-rich zones with eerie precision. Who needs GPS when you've got a memory palace built from mammoth bones and intuition? So as you drift tonight, think of those caves not as cold, dead stone, but as warm living rooms. Think of the handprints not as relics, but high fives across time. Think of their silence not as ignorance, but as depth. Because sometimes, the smartest thing you can do is sit by the fire and listen. The air is crisp now, thinning with altitude, because you're trailing the Neanderthals into places few modern humans would dare call home. Mountains, craggy, exposed, temperamental peaks, where the clouds skim low and the cold sets in fast. But they don't flinch. They know this place. They chose this place. Their bones have been found high above sea level, stone tools scattered among frost-scarred outcroppings and goat-worn ledges. What were they doing up there? Looking for game, escaping rivals, practicing their inner mountain goat cosplay. Historians still argue whether high-altitude living was seasonal necessity or stubborn preference, but either way, one truth sticks. Neanderthals weren't dainty creatures of the valley. They were cold-weather commandos. You feel it in your skin. The shift in temperature, the sting of the wind, the thud of your foot against packed snow. But they're unfazed, wrapped in furs stitched tight, muscles thick under layers of survival. Their short, stocky builds were perfect for conserving heat. Less surface area means less exposure, a literal warm-blooded advantage. You, by contrast, are shivering just looking at them. They move like they belong here. Climbing like gravity is more of a suggestion. Their hands, broad, strong, grip ice-slick rocks without hesitation. There's no trail, no signs. But they know the way, not from GPS, but from something older. Familiarity etched into the folds of their brains. They've walked this ridge before, smelled the snow, heard the distant echo of something moving below. Deer, maybe, or lion. And here's where it gets wild. Fossilized pollen, animal remains, and micro-debris suggest they weren't just visiting. They were living up here, sleeping, eating, napping flint into deadly points, while frost crept under the edges of their shelters. Maybe in wind-carved alcoves, maybe under overhangs stuffed with moss and hide. Imagine waking up, stretching your sore limbs, and watching the sunrise paint the entire valley in gold and silence. Coffee optional. You spot one now. Maybe a woman chipping at a piece of chert, snow clinging to her hair. She's not thinking about legacy. She's thinking about whether this point will snap. About the ibex she saw yesterday. About how to keep the fire lit through the night. But still, you can't help but feel a kind of reverence. This is her world, and she's winning. Here's a quirky fringe detail. In one mountainous site, researchers found the remains of a baby Neanderthal, buried with what appeared to be animal bones arranged deliberately. Burial? Ritual? Sentiment? Or just practicality? No one knows. But the altitude, the care, it makes you wonder if the location meant something. A final resting place above the clouds. And don't forget, this wasn't a time of isolation. Neanderthals weren't hiding from the world. They were conquering it, one tough terrain at a time. Their range stretched from the icy windburn of northern Europe to the sunny Mediterranean, from river valleys to coastal cliffs. But up here, in the cold, they showed what they were really made of. Think of it as their Everest, only they didn't take selfies, just fossils. You sit for a moment, back against a boulder slick with lichen, and listen to the mountain breathe. It's the kind of stillness that hums beneath your skin. A soundscape of nothing, punctuated by the scratch of claws, the rumble of far-off thunder, the soft huff of your own breath. This is how they lived, with nature not as background noise, but as the main character. You remember that their hands weren't just strong, they were skilled. They crafted specialized tools for these conditions. Hafted weapons, scrapers, cutting tools. One site revealed a blade with residue from heated birch pitch, Neanderthal superglue, made by dry distilling tree bark without fire exposure. That's not trial and error. That's chemistry. And that pitch? It was found in alpine caves. So yes, in between evading predators and managing altitude sickness, they were also inventing adhesives. Talk about multitasking. They didn't farm, they didn't build temples, but they adapted, over and over, through ice ages and climate shifts, with no written language, no cities, no internet recipe blogs. Just instinct, memory, and a brain that could sketch out a hunt plan in the snow before the prey ever smelled them coming. One of them stands now, spear in hand, scanning the valley. There's a tension in his shoulders, not fear, but readiness. The kind that only comes when you've survived a dozen winters and still have all your fingers. You imagine him walking back to camp tonight, a fresh kill over his shoulder, frost in his beard, and maybe, just maybe, a song on his lips. Something low and rhythmic, passed down from someone who once sang to keep the wolves away. So tonight, as you drift deeper, let the mountain cradle you. Let the cold whisper past your ears, just enough to remind you that you come from people who didn't hide from storms. They climbed into them. You wake, if dreaming ever stopped, to the thick scent of grease, smoke, and something metallic in the air. Fresh kill. Not yours, but theirs. The Neanderthals are gathered around the carcass, methodically slicing, cracking, and scraping with a patience that feels sacred. This isn't just dinner. This is survival choreography, and every move matters. They're not just carving meat, they're harvesting an entire animal, bone for tools, hide for clothing, tendons for thread, and marrow for that fatty gold prized in a world where calories mean everything. You kneel closer, watching one of them angle a sharp flint blade through a joint with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing it 1,000 times. Not rushed, not careless. Like a surgeon who doesn't need anesthesia, just silence. And here's your mainstream fact for tonight. Neanderthals were excellent hunters. For a long time, scientists thought they were mostly scavengers, snatching leftovers like prehistoric raccoons. But the evidence, embedded spear points, strategic kill sites, bones showing trauma consistent with organized hunting, tells a different story. These people weren't waiting for scraps. They were taking down big game. You look at the animal, a reindeer maybe, or a bison. Large, tough, and definitely not something you chase solo. It took teamwork, cooperation that's more chessboard than rugby scrum. Imagine flanking a 1,000-pound beast with no motorized transport, no tranquilizer darts, just spears, smarts, and sweat. And yes, it's likely they used ambush techniques, funneling animals toward cliffs or traps. Smart doesn't always mean elegant, it means effective. And while we're talking tactics, the weapons were often thrusting spears, not throwing ones. That means close quarters, up close and personal with muscle, hooves, and panic. Some researchers even suggest this led to more injuries, More broken bones in Neanderthal skeletons than in modern humans of the same era. Think of it as the Paleolithic version of full-contact football without helmets. But tonight, the hunt was clean. No blood on the snow beyond the kill site. No broken limbs. Just a slow, steady rhythm of disassembly. One Neanderthal carefully breaks open a femur, tapping it against a stone until the marrow slips out like pudding. Another scrapes fat into a pouch made of hide. They even take the brain, fat-rich, nutrient-dense, and too valuable to waste. There is no ick here, just gratitude in muscle memory. And now your quirky fringe tidbit. In some dig sites, archaeologists found bird bones with telltale markings, not consistent with butchering, but with feather removal. Why? Not for food. Feathers are mostly useless that way. But for decoration, ritual, symbolic use, maybe. Or maybe our ancient cousins liked the look of a red eagle plume tucked behind an ear. After all, fashion starts somewhere. You sit beside a young Neanderthal, maybe 12 years old, watching him sharpen a piece of flint. His hands are quick, practiced. This isn't child's play. He's learning to survive. And it hits you. There's no formal school, no curriculum. Learning is watching, doing, repeating, getting it wrong, bleeding a little, getting it right. The old ones don't hover, but they glance over now and then, just to make sure. It's mentoring at the pace of firelight. And this brings us to another scholarly tug-of-war. Were Neanderthals really as mentally capable as modern humans? Or were they brilliant mimics without true innovation? The answer, of course, is still debated, but many researchers now argue that their intelligence was different, not deficient. Less abstract, more tactile. Less symbolic, more sensory. You wouldn't give one a whiteboard and expect calculus, but hand them stone and bone, and they'd build a survival toolkit that'd put your camping gear to shame. One of them stands, stretches, and tosses a bone to the side. Not carelessly, it lands in a pile. They're sorting, not just eating and discarding, but organizing waste. There's a spatial logic to it, a kind of behavioral intelligence that speaks to long-term planning. No one wants tomorrow's fire pit reeking of today's guts. The fire crackles. Fat drips onto the coals with a hiss that makes someone chuckle. Maybe they like the smell. Maybe it reminds them of success. You'll never know, because their language isn't yours. But their meaning is. You get it. You feel it. It's not that different from your last backyard barbecue, except no one here is arguing about who brought the buns. As night settles, the group pulls in tighter, circling around the embers. Full bellies, tired limbs, content minds. The stars overhead are diamond sharp, and the moon's just a sliver, barely hanging on. Someone tosses a bone into the fire, maybe as thanks, maybe as trash, and the flames leap like they understand. Here's your soft joke for the road. You ever try to eat paleo? These folks invented paleo. And spoiler, they didn't survive on kale chips and salmon fillets. They ate what moved, what grew, what couldn't run fast enough. And they did it without blender bottles or meal prep Sundays. So as your eyes grow heavy, remember this. Your ancestors didn't just survive, they excelled. Not in spite of the brutal world around them, but because of how they met it. With sharp tools, sharper minds, and an understanding of meat that would make your local butcher blush. Let the warmth of the fire carry you. Let the scent of roasted marrow and leather lull you into that soft, prehistoric peace. The hunt is over. The night is safe. And the stars will keep watch until morning. Now it's morning again, though morning here just means the light has shifted from black to a kind of wolf grey. You stretch, joints creaking like old wood, and the Neanderthals are already moving. No groggy yawns, no coffee rituals, just action. Quiet, deliberate, steady. Today they're not hunting, they're making. You shuffle closer, drawn by the sound of rhythmic tapping, the slow, satisfying click of stone on stone. Flint napping, a dance of sparks and edges. One of them, broad-shouldered, a scar running down his temple, is hunched over a piece of flint the size of a loaf of bread. He strikes it at an angle, just so, and a flake snaps off cleanly. revealing a razor-sharp edge so fine it could split a hair. No lie, modern surgeons have used similar ancient blades in medical settings. Turns out Neanderthal tech sometimes still wins. Here's your mainstream fact. Neanderthals were master toolmakers. We're not talking about random rock bashing. This was a full-on, multi-step, often pre-planned operation. They used what's called the Levallois technique, a method where the shape of the flake is designed in advance. That's like baking a cake where you not only know what it will look like, but what slices you'll cut and how thick each one will be before you even crack an egg. And here's the quiet wonder. Their brains had to hold that plan while their hands made it real. Spatial awareness, fine motor control, cause and effect. You wouldn't give a chimpanzee a flint core and expect this kind of output, but give it to a Neanderthal and you get beauty in brutal simplicity. You see it in the finished pieces, scrapers, blades, hand axes. Some hafted to wooden handles with natural glues and wrapped in sinew like primitive duct tape. These weren't disposable. They were crafted with care, sometimes retouched, resharpened, even passed down. One archaeologist found a tool that had been modified over and over again, used across generations maybe. A legacy chipped into stone. And speaking of legacies, here's your quirky fringe tidbit. There's evidence that Neanderthals used manganese dioxide. Yep, the stuff in modern batteries, to help with fire starting. They crushed it into powder and added it to wood shavings to lower the combustion temperature. Translation: they were hacking chemical reactions before the periodic table was even a twinkle in Mendeleev's eye. Neanderthal Science Club, small membership, big results. Now, not everything they made was utilitarian. Some objects, pierced animal teeth, polished stones, curious red ochre stains, suggest something more. Decoration, identity markers, just vibes. Historians still argue whether these were symbols or just fancy trash. But that's part of the magic, right? The not knowing, the guessing. You see a bone with smooth grooves and think, was this a pendant, a charm, a tool handle, or something else entirely? There's a little girl sitting off to the side, watching the adults work. Her fingers are dirty, her hair a tangled halo, and she's copying them with a lump of soft shale. Her flake comes off wrong, too thick, too clunky, but no one scolds her. Instead, an older woman kneels beside her, guides her wrist, shows her the angle. You don't need words to teach, not when hands speak so fluently. And that leads to another hot scholarly debate. Did Neanderthals have language? Not just grunts and gestures, but actual structured speech. The evidence is tantalizing. They had the physical structures, the hyoid bone, the vocal tract. Their brains had regions that lit up in similar ways to ours, but no recordings, no Rosetta Stone, just silence and speculation. Still, watching them now, the way they gesture, grunt softly, make eye contact, you get the sense that something is being said. Just not in a way you'd understand. Like overhearing a dream. A young man walks past you carrying a long wooden shaft. It's not yet a spear, just a branch being shaped into one. He uses a sharp scraper to shave it down, occasionally testing the weight, the balance. You want to tell him to sand it or throw some varnish on it, but he already knows. It's not about perfection. It's about function. A tool that works is a tool that lives. Meanwhile, near the fire pit, someone is boiling water in a container made of animal stomach. Yeah, it sounds gross, but it works. Drop in hot stones, and voila, portable cooking. You've spent money on tech that does less and breaks faster. They're adapting again, to the season, to the terrain, to what they've got. No two toolkits from different Neanderthal sites are exactly the same, which means they weren't just copying blindly, they were innovating locally. That's kind of genius. It's what modern engineers call situational design. Your ancestors called it not dying. And maybe the most beautiful part, these tools weren't always abandoned. Sometimes they were left in places like graves or deep caves, where retrieval wasn't practical. That suggests meaning, memory, maybe even mourning. What kind of mind thinks, he won't need this anymore, but he should still have it. You take a last look at their toolkit laid out on the ground like a prehistoric art exhibit. Bone awls, flake scrapers, points chipped to a deadly tip. This isn't chaos, it's craftsmanship. Neanderthal IKEA, minus the weird instructions. So now, as the day winds down, and their shadows stretch long across the packed earth, you start to realize these weren't people surviving the Ice Age. They were shaping it. One tool, one flake, one spark at a time. Let that rhythm lull you. The steady tap-tap of stone on stone, the whisper of fibers being twisted into rope, the hiss of steam rising from a boiling skin bag of soup. It's all the same sound, really, the sound of knowing. You're walking now, slow and sure, through a corridor of pale limestone, walls damp with the breath of ages. Behind you, the fire smoke fades, but ahead, echoes, strange ones. Not wind, not dripping water. It's something deeper, lower. A hum, a murmur. You follow. The Neanderthals move like shadows in the half-light, their bare feet silent on the cool cave floor. You're in their sacred space now, though no one calls it that out loud. There are no altars, no stained glass, just rock. But it holds them like a memory. And here's your mainstream fact. Neanderthals didn't just live in caves. They used them. As homes, sure, but also as ritual spaces, artistic studios, maybe even gathering halls. Deep inside, past where light naturally reaches, they left behind handprints, pigment splashes, and weird, wonderful objects arranged just so. Not random, intentional. You turn a corner, and there it is. A shape in red ochre, a ladder, a panel of dots, or maybe an animal drawn from memory. It's faint, older than anything you've ever seen, but it burns with presence. This isn't a doodle, it's a message. And the kicker, some of these cave paintings have been dated to over 64,000 years ago, long before modern Homo sapiens showed up in Europe, which means Neanderthals were artists first, and maybe poets too, if we stretch the definition. One theory, fringe, but oddly romantic, suggests some cave acoustics were chosen for their echo properties. Certain chambers resonate when you hum or sing. Imagine that. An early evening ritual where everyone gathers in a sound cave, humming together, creating a sonic cathedral long before the first brick temple was ever laid. But not everyone buys that. Historians still argue whether Neanderthal cave use was spiritual or strictly practical. Were they expressing awe, fear, reverence, or just painting because it looked cool? The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. But down here in the hush, it feels holy. You reach out to touch a hand stencil on the wall, red dust around an empty space. Someone placed their palm there, spat pigment over it, and left their absence behind. It's the oldest selfie you'll ever see, and it's haunting. You want to ask them, what did you want to say? Were you claiming this space? Making a mark? Just playing? Here's your quirky fringe tidbit. In one Spanish cave, archaeologists found a ring of broken stalagmites arranged in a circle, deep in the dark. No light, no easy access, just stone upon stone, placed with care. What was it? A calendar, a shrine, a ritual platform? We don't know, but someone went to great effort to build in a place where no one lived. You imagine the ritual, torches flickering, shadows dancing, ochre staining fingers and noses. A group gathered not for food or fire, but for something intangible. Connection, belief, or maybe just beauty. Even Neanderthals needed beauty. One of them pulls out a lump of ochre and begins grinding it with a rock, turning it to powder. She mixes it with animal fat, dabbing it onto her fingers, then onto a bit of hide. It's art supply prep, Stone Age style. You think of paint nights, canvas kits delivered to your door. These folks had no kit, just imagination and nerve. The kids are playing nearby, drawing lines in the dirt with sticks, mimicking what they've seen deeper in the cave. Maybe that's how it all starts. Imitation that becomes innovation. A squiggle becomes a story. A mark becomes a meaning. And suddenly, you're making culture. not just surviving. The air down here is cooler, heavier. You start to notice smells, mineral tang, soot, old bones. Sensory input overload, but in a sleepy way, like being wrapped in too many blankets. You blink slowly, and for a moment, you swear you see movement in the ochre shapes, as if the past is still shifting on the walls. There's another debate, of course. How much did Neanderthals really understand symbolism? Did they think abstractly? Could they grasp metaphor? Or were they just following patterns that looked pretty? Science doesn't know for sure. But if you've ever stared at a painting and felt something stir inside you, something wordless and deep, you know the answer doesn't always need to be logical. One man hums softly, tapping a hollow bone against the rock. It's rhythmic, hypnotic. The others listen, then join in, clapping, whistling, thumping hands against their chests. Not music, maybe, but not music either. Something primal, percussive. You feel it in your spine. And here comes your soft joke. Spotify could never. No playlists, no buffering, no algorithm. Just firelight and rhythm and the raw pleasure of noise that moves you. It's like prehistoric jazz. As they gather around the flame, faces painted, voices humming, walls alive with ancient art, you realize they weren't just badass freaks of nature. They were dreamers, creators, weird little cousins with a flair for drama and a knack for pigments. So lie back on the cave floor, cool rock cradling your spine, the distant rhythm of stone drums fading slowly into silence. Let the hum of their voices lull you. Let the walls speak in ochre and echo. Let the dark wrap around you, soft and thick, until the torch goes out. The world outside is waiting, but for now, you're home, deep in the red-blooded heart of human expression. You wake, or maybe you never quite slept, lying curled beside a low fire whose embers still whisper against the morning chill. The cave behind you hums faintly, like it remembers the night's echoes, but the Neanderthals are already on the move again. Today, you follow them into something different. A network. Yes, you heard that right. A network. Not wires or Wi-Fi signals, obviously, but people, groups, talking, sharing, trading, moving across the land with more pattern than chaos. That's your mainstream fact for this dreamy morning. Neanderthals didn't just stick to their caves like gloomy hermits. They roamed and, crucially, they connected. It starts with the obsidian. One of the young men, long arms, tight braids, smudged with ash, holds up a glossy black flake. It glitters like glass. Which is weird, because there's no obsidian anywhere near here. None for hundreds of kilometers. That means it was carried, traded, handed over by someone who had it, who maybe got it from someone else, who got it from... You get the point. Networks. And not just for rocks. There's a chunk of marine shell strung on a bit of sinew, polished to a shine. You're at least 2 weeks' walk from the sea. It's not decoration, it's a breadcrumb. A whisper that Neanderthals moved. Maybe not in massive tribes, but in scattered families who knew the land, and more importantly, knew others. Here is your fringe tidbit for today, a dreamy stroll. There's a cave in France, Grotte du Ren, where archaeologists found what looks like a Neanderthal craft corner. Beads, tools, pigments, worked bone. And nearby, human remains that aren't quite Neanderthal and not quite us. A genetic mystery stew. It sparked whispers about contact zones, mixed groups, cultural blending. Some scholars even call it the first melting pot. Of course, historians still argue whether these finds prove deep social networks or just a few random meetings. But as you trail behind a group that clearly knows how to navigate terrain, find resources, and spot danger from a mile off, you feel it in your gut. These people didn't live in isolation. They were part of something wider, a web of life, skill, and maybe even gossip. You climb a ridge with them, wind pushing at your cheeks, and on the horizon you spot a wisp of smoke. Not their smoke, someone else's. Another camp, Another fire, another knot in the string. There's a low grunt, a shift in tension. Everyone sees it. Everyone decides whether to move toward it or veer away. This is negotiation without words. And maybe, just maybe, sometimes they did move toward it. To trade. To swap tools or knowledge, or even partners. Yeah, you heard that right. DNA evidence tells us there was interbreeding between Neanderthals and modern humans. More than once. More than casually. And today, you've probably got 1 to 2% of their genes inside you. Congratulations, you're part Ice Age. Someone once said, sex is the oldest form of diplomacy. It's also how you accidentally absorb a few genes for better immunity or high-altitude breathing. So next time you're wheezing on a hike, thank your Neanderthal great-aunt. One of the elders now unwraps a small bundle. Inside is something precious. A tool with intricate retouching, worn down by years of use, but still sharp. It's not just a cutter, it's an heirloom, the kind of thing you might give away to show trust or to seal a deal. You can't help but smile. The world may have lacked borders, but it didn't lack relationships. Another debate, still smouldering in university halls. Did Neanderthals have a sense of kin beyond blood? Were alliances political? Were there gift economies, debts of honor, seasonal gatherings? It's speculative, sure, but every time a site pops up with signs of shared practices across regions, that old idea that they were isolated, static cave folk crumbles a bit more. You squat near a stream, watching 2 Neanderthal women compare fibers for cordage. They don't speak your language, but the vibe is unmistakable. One offers a sample, the other tests the strength, nods, grunts approval. There's an exchange, not of coins, not of contracts, just mutual benefit. Barter in its purest form. And here, as a soft joke for your half-asleep brain, Neanderthal eBay was just 2 people grunting over mammoth sinew and saying, deal with their eyes. Now the wind changes. It carries distant smells, wood smoke, damp fur, something musky. Another group is nearby. Yours slows, not out of fear, more like curiosity. There's a moment of pause, a decision to make, and that's the beauty of it, really. These weren't static tribes defending fixed turf like medieval castles. They were flexible, adaptive, responsive to the land and the relationships it wove, like travelers in a giant open-air bazaar that spanned the mammoth steppe world. By the time you descend back into a forest clearing, the moment of encounter has passed. No strangers appear, but the idea of them lingers, like smoke that never quite fades. Somewhere out there, others are flaking tools, boiling marrow, teaching kids how to scrape hides. They're not enemies. They're potential allies, threads in the same tapestry. And that's what stays with you as you sit by the fire again that night, listening to quiet laughter, watching a girl thread beads onto twine. These people were not lone wolves. They were nodes. Each campfire a dot in a constellation of shared ideas, gene flows, and trade-offs. Not primitive, just different. And honestly, kind of brilliant. So close your eyes now, as the stars above mirror the sparks below. Picture the threads stretching across valleys, weaving through rivers, touching the edges of the sea. You're not watching history. You're part of it. Carried in the blood, the breath, and the stories. The morning is wet with fog, curling like ghost fingers around tree trunks as you wake beside a sleeping group of Neanderthals. One of them, broad shoulders, sleepy eyes, stirs beside you, rolls over, and lets out a snort so deep it feels like a small earthquake under your ribs. Yep, it's going to be one of those days, because today you learn how these so-called savages actually raised families. And here's the kicker, the mainstream fact to hold on to as you rub the chill from your arms. Neanderthals didn't just survive, they parented, they nurtured. They carried infants across frozen valleys and held the hands of the elderly as they walked uneven terrain. Evidence shows old Neanderthals lived long after injuries that should have been fatal. which means someone took care of them. Let that sink in for a second. These folks didn't dump their weak. They didn't chase off burdens. They stayed. They healed. They cared. A Neanderthal woman with fused vertebrae, a blind elder with a crushed leg, a child born with developmental conditions, all found buried with care. Tenderness doesn't fossilize, but sometimes mercy leaves a trail in the bones. The camp is waking now, and you watch as a mother gently rocks a toddler who's sticky with last night's berry mush. The kid is chattering in a language you can't decode, but the tone is universal, whining. The mum sighs. She hands the kid a shiny shell. The whining stops. Peace restored. Yep, parenting, unchanged for 50,000 years. And here comes your fringe tidbit. Some researchers think Neanderthal childhood might have lasted longer than ours, developmentally speaking. Bigger heads, slower growth, more years under direct care. Imagine toddler tantrums lasting just a bit longer. Now imagine surviving that without cartoons or caffeine. Respect. You wander toward a half-built shelter. No straight walls or IKEA blueprints, just bones and hides lashed into something that keeps out the rain. A young boy and an older man are tying sinew cord, and the boy is, well, messing it up. Repeatedly. But the old man doesn't snap. He demonstrates. Again and again. Patience like stone. Historians still argue whether Neanderthal societies had formal teaching roles, or if kids just learned by hanging around. But bones and tools suggest mastery required years of practice. You don't just flint-knap a hand axe like you're peeling an apple. You learn through repetition, through example, through someone letting you mess it up 50 times. And while we're on the topic of parenting, let's talk about the dads. Because recent interpretations of hunting injuries and wear patterns hint that Neanderthal males weren't always the sole providers. There's a growing case for shared roles. Dad's babysitting, mum's hunting, grandma's distributing snacks. Kind of like a prehistoric PTA. Soft joke incoming. If you've ever lugged a diaper bag the size of a small boulder across a mall parking lot, you've got nothing on these folks. Neanderthal mums hiked snowdrifts with babies slung in hide wraps, and toddlers asking why every 10 steps. Evolutionary fitness? More like evolutionary patience. One young couple now sits near the fire, their child nestled in a hollowed fur pouch. They're quiet, murmuring to each other in low tones. Not survival chatter, something gentler. You watch her braid a cord while he rubs an antler into shape. It's intimate, domestic, and utterly human. Which brings us to another ongoing debate. Did Neanderthals have family structures? Nuclear families? Were they monogamous? Did they co-parent or swap mates like some modern primates? The truth is, we don't know. But teeth and mitochondrial DNA from burial sites hint that small groups may have included extended kin, grandparents, siblings, cousins. What you can feel, lying near the fire with warmth leaking into your skin, is the emotional glue holding it all together. These people weren't just hunting partners. They were something softer, a unit, not perfect, not hallmark, but deeply bonded. As dusk stretches long shadows through the trees, you notice a group of children playing with sticks, acting out a hunt. One pretends to be a bear. The others giggle, shriek, run. No adult stops them. No one says, "Be careful." They're learning through play, like every child in every village in every corner of every world. Later, one kid brings a carved bit of bone to an elder woman, proudly showing it off. She doesn't smile, but she nods. Approval. And that tiny nod glows like firelight. Another parent roasts something over the flames. Roots, maybe a lizard, and carefully cools a piece before offering it to their child. It's such a small gesture. Mundane. But it holds an entire species' future inside it. Generations, passed forward one warm bite at a time. And now, the quirky theory to tuck under your mammoth skin blanket tonight. Some archaeologists argue that Neanderthal lullabies may have existed. Simple melodies hummed to soothe fussy babies. No written score, no vinyl recordings, just low, rhythmic hums, like breathing with a tune, a mother's song. If that's true, The first music you ever heard, before Mozart, before TikTok, was a Neanderthal lullaby. You're welcome. Night falls again. You're nestled in soft hides, close to the others. The baby snores like a tiny walrus. Someone stirs the fire. The smell of wood smoke and damp fur fills the air. And in that glow, you realize something. We didn't invent love, or parenting, or affection. We inherited it. From creatures with brow ridges and wide noses and enormous hearts. So close your eyes now and dream of lullabies echoing in bone-lined shelters, of tiny hands gripping fingers, of firelit glances and long, slow patience. They raised their young the best they could, just like us. The air tonight is sharper, like it knows you're about to walk into something sacred. The Neanderthals are quiet, unusually so, moving like shadows across cold stone. No laughter, no idle tool-making, not even the soft rhythm of bone against hide. Just silence. You follow them deeper into a narrow pass, the sound of your breath suddenly too loud. And here, tucked into a crag that most would overlook, is a cave. Not just a cave. A place. One that seems older than wind and darker than memory. This is where they come not to eat or sleep or scrape hides, but to remember. And now, for your mainstream fact, Neanderthals buried their dead. Intentionally, purposefully, with care. In places like Shanidar in Iraq and La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, archaeologists found skeletons placed in shallow graves, sometimes surrounded by items, tools, bones, maybe even flowers. This wasn't just disposal, it was ritual. The first time we realized that, it was a mic drop moment in anthropology. Suddenly, Neanderthals weren't just smart, they were symbolic. They had beliefs. Maybe not gods, not temples, but definitely a sense that death meant something. And you feel it here, walking past an alcove where a skull sits. Not discarded, but placed, centered, framed by ochre marks. You kneel. It's not dramatic, not spooky, just quiet. This person was known, remembered, cared for. And now, your fringe detail. In Brunicle Cave, France, deep underground and nearly inaccessible, Neanderthals built circular structures out of broken stalagmites. Perfect rings, no clear purpose, no food, no tools, just strange, fire-scorched shapes in total darkness. Some call it architecture, others say it was ceremonial, or a meeting place, or something else. Historians still argue whether these mysterious structures were spiritual sites, social gathering spots, or something beyond even our concept of culture. But one thing's certain, you don't drag 400 pieces of stalagmite into an unlit cave for no reason. You do it with intent. Back in your cave, the mood has changed. A Neanderthal woman stands before a painted wall, charcoal, red ochre, maybe manganese, and adds a smudge with her fingers. It's not a mammoth or a handprint this time. It's abstract, a swirl, a spiral, something from inside. Art not as record, but as release. Another person lights a small fire, just enough to make the pigments flicker. They all gather close, and you feel something shift. Like you're part of a story you don't fully understand, but that still pulls at your ribs. Here's a gentle joke as the cave quiets. Modern funerals have Spotify playlists and Zoom links. Neanderthals had rock walls and the weight of unspoken memory. Arguably more poetic, definitely less buffering. One of the older Neanderthals now places a carved piece of antler beside the skull. There's no ceremony, no chant, just the act. Simple, deliberate. The meaning isn't shouted, it's whispered into stone, and this is the soul of it. They didn't leave their dead to the wolves. They brought them home, buried them, sat beside them. Maybe they grieved. Maybe they remembered. Maybe they believed something waited after. You think about your own rituals, flowers on graves, names carved into marble, the way we light candles and share stories. And then you look at this moment, firelight dancing over ancient rock, and you feel that faint pulse of continuity. Another scholarly question still smoulders in academic circles. Did Neanderthals believe in an afterlife? Or were their rituals more about social cohesion? Some argue these burials weren't about honoring the dead, but reaffirming the living. A way to say, we remember, we remain. But when you see a mother trace the forehead of a child's skull, whispering something too soft for words, it's hard not to believe it meant more. Maybe not heaven, but presence, a continuation. Later you step outside. The stars are impossibly bright. You wonder what stories they saw in those lights. Constellations not shaped like bears or archers, but something else, something lost to time. And then your final soft detail of the night. There are handprints in caves, clear, deliberate, sometimes layered, sometimes child-sized. But in one cave in Spain, a print was missing fingers, not accidentally, deliberately removed. Was it a ritual, a symbol, a mourning gesture? No one knows. But someone did it, tens of thousands of years ago. Someone left a message. You return to the fire. The group is still quiet. Not sad, just reflective. Like the cave changed something. You lie down again beside them, their breath deepening into sleep. And you feel it now. You understand. These weren't monsters. They weren't brutes. They were mourners, artists, believers in something bigger than flesh and bone. Close your eyes. The cave walls are still warm with breath and memory. The dead are never truly gone. They echo through firelight and pigment, through gestures, through silence. You wake before the others, wrapped in hide. The ashes of last night's fire still warm beneath your fingers. Outside, frost silvers every branch, and a mist crawls across the forest floor like it's trying not to be noticed. But the Neanderthals aren't sleeping in. Not today. Today they're moving, migrating. There, you stretch, blink, and rise. Because you're about to learn the truth about how Neanderthals roamed the ancient Earth. Not just aimlessly, but with a logic as fierce as the weather they survived. First, the mainstream fact. Neanderthals were nomads. Not in a whimsical wanderlust way, but in a seasonal, survival-driven rhythm. Archaeological sites show patterns of temporary settlements. They followed herds, tracked migrations, remembered where the food returned and when. This wasn't just movement, it was mapping without maps. A group is already packing tools, tucking sharpened flint into hide wraps, dousing embers, and smearing mud over their fire circle to leave no trace. You help, mostly by staying out of the way, and watch as a mother ties her sleeping baby onto her back, with braided cord and quiet skill. Nobody rushes, but everyone moves with the same unspoken momentum. You're not just walking into the woods, you're shifting existence. Every possession counts, every choice weighs. There's no just-in-case bag. If you bring it, it matters. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Some Neanderthal migration paths suggest they may have returned to the same places over and over, seasonal cycles etched into memory. In some French and Spanish caves, layers of soot and bone reveal repeated, long-term use, with gaps suggesting deliberate absences and returns, like reserving an Airbnb, only it's full of mammoth bones. Historians still argue whether Neanderthal groups coordinated these routes collectively or followed more fragmented, family-based patterns. Did clans meet and split like waves converging? Or were they fiercely territorial, repeating inherited loops like ancient GPS routes locked into their DNA? You feel it in your calves now. Steep slopes, uneven ground, the crunch of frost under barefoot wraps. You slip once, land on your butt, and a Neanderthal teen snorts with laughter. You laugh too, because honestly, hiking without granola bars and podcasts is humbling, but they know the way, that's clear. One stops occasionally to sniff the wind, to touch bark, to listen. Not superhuman, just attuned. You, meanwhile, are wheezing like a cursed harmonica. Here's a soft joke to lighten your breath. Today's hiking guides have compass apps and solar-powered phone chargers. Neanderthals had moss, memory, and leg muscles carved by glaciers. Guess who didn't need Wi-Fi? As the group crests a ridge, a valley unfurls before you, like a myth made real. Dotted with trees, glinting with water, You spot animal trails, nesting birds, and in the distance, bison. Not a herd yet, but the beginning of one. The migration gamble just paid off. The group fans out. Some scout, others rest. You join a pair gathering firewood, your fingers finally nimble enough not to snap every twig noisily like a modern goofball. Progress. Later, you sit by a new fire, bones tired, watching as one Neanderthal draws a map in the dirt with a stick, curves for rivers, slashes for cliffs. They don't write. But this is communication, spatial memory, storytelling through terrain. You lean closer. One of the marks looks like a symbol, maybe a landmark, maybe a warning. But the meaning is clear to the others. They nod, adjust their plans. You've just witnessed a prehistoric staff meeting. No slide deck required. And now, let's go full fringe. Some paleoanthropologists believe Neanderthals navigated using the stars. Not like Greek sailors or modern astronomers, but observationally, by knowing which stars rose where and when. It's speculative, yes, but if your survival depends on location, wouldn't you watch the sky? Even now, as dusk blankets the camp, one Neanderthal stares up, quiet, thoughtful. The stars emerge slowly, one by one, as if remembering their positions. You lie back beside them, the fire popping, your legs still sore, and you wonder, how many times did they look up like this? Did they whisper names for constellations? Did they use them like waypoints? The group eats in tired silence. Roasted roots, slivers of dried meat, nothing wasted. One person shares their portion with an older man who didn't hunt today. No shame, no scorekeeping, just balance. You feel it again, that thread running through everything. Movement, yes, but not chaos. They don't roam, they return, like tides, like breath. And now for your final image of the day. A Neanderthal child asleep under furs, a slingshot tucked beside them. Tomorrow, they'll walk again. In 5 years, they'll lead. In 50, they'll pass on the route. No written maps, no roads, just footsteps in memory. The fire dims. You curl in close, the cold a little kinder now. You've walked with ghosts tonight, and they've shown you the shape of old paths, still echoing beneath highways and cities. Close your eyes. Drift. The journey isn't over yet. There's something different about the air tonight. Thicker, like it's bracing for a story. You're sitting near the fire again, but the talk among the Neanderthals has shifted. It's not about where the next herd is moving or when the rains will come. Tonight, the words are slower, softer, about something you almost forgot existed out here in the grind of survival. Play. That's right, you're about to watch the Neanderthals unwind. Your mainstream fact first, just to ground us. Neanderthals made and used musical instruments. The most famous example? A flute, carved from a bare femur, found in the Slovenian cave of Divja Babe. It's about 50,000 years old and has 4 finger holes. Some say it's accidental, but others, they've played actual music on replicas of it, and it sounds haunting, like wind whispering in an empty cathedral. You wouldn't expect a group of Ice Age survivalists to get musical, but here you are. One of them picks up a hollowed-out bone, taps it gently with a stone. Another rhythmically slaps a stretched hide. It's primitive, sure, but it's unmistakably music, and somehow it lifts the cold off your shoulders. Then comes your quirky twist. You catch 2 teens hurling rocks at a target, a lopsided bundle of grass. They're keeping score. One hits the bullseye and howls with glee, arms raised like a gladiator. The other groans, rolls his eyes, and snatches a larger stone. It's not about the hunt. It's not even about practice. It's play. Goofy, competitive, joy for the sake of it play. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals had formal games or structured sport, but scattered finds of toys. Yes, actual carved items with no clear use, hint at a culture that didn't just survive, but paused to enjoy. There's even speculation that some items buried with children were comfort objects. Dolls, trinkets, the Paleolithic version of a teddy bear. You lean back and watch. A child runs in circles, laughing as they try to balance a stick on their nose. Another claps every time they succeed. It's clumsy, hilarious, and deeply, deeply human. Let's drop a soft joke in here. You spend $1,000 on a sound machine, meditation app, and yoga retreat to rediscover joy. They hit rocks and howl. Who's the advanced species again? The music picks up. The rhythm is steady now. One of the Neanderthals begins to move, slow at first, then more fluid. It's not modern dance, but it is dance, swaying, jumping, stomping the dirt like it owes them something. Others join. It's wild, unchoreographed, but entirely electric. The fire crackles, feet thud, and laughter bursts through the smoke like fireworks. You feel it in your chest. This is release. This is the pressure valve that keeps a species sane. And now for something deliciously fringe. Some researchers suggest Neanderthal play behavior included mimicry, making animal sounds, copying gestures, even playful deception. If that's true, then your ancient neighbors weren't just drummers. They were improvisers, theaters of the tundra, one step away from stand-up. And honestly, you believe it. Because one of the older Neanderthals is now making exaggerated faces behind a rock while a child pretends not to notice, barely holding in a giggle. When the elder finally roars and gets caught, the kid shrieks with laughter, dives behind you like you're a trusted teammate in a millennia-old game of tag. You can't help it. You smile. This isn't the solemn, savage world you expected. It's messy, warm, silly. Another scholarly debate still smolders. Did Neanderthals share oral stories, myths, jokes, legends? While there's no direct evidence, because unfortunately stories don't fossilize, the social structures implied by burial practices, play, and group cooperation suggest language rich enough for narrative. You watch as two Neanderthals act something out, one pretending to be a mammoth, the other a heroic hunter. There's pantomime, there's drama, there's a triumphant ending. Everyone claps. They had stories. You feel that in your bones. And here's your nightly callback. Remember that cave with the abstract spiral? You see that same motion now, traced into the dirt by a bored-looking teen, over and over. Maybe it was art, maybe it was fidgeting, but whatever it was, it stuck. Later, as the energy wanes, you find yourself curled beside the fire again, belly sore from laughing, eyes heavy. A lull falls over the group. One of them begins a low chant, half hum, half memory. Not quite a lullaby, not quite words, but it pulls your heartbeat into sync with theirs. Even here, in the oldest shadows of memory, we made room for joy, for sound, for nonsense, and for each other. You close your eyes. The last thing you hear is a soft, sleepy giggle, the sound of someone who forgot, for just one night, that survival had to be hard. You wake to the smell of smoke and something warm bubbling in a skin pouch. Soup, maybe. If soup were made from bark, tubers, and the marrow of bones you definitely don't want to ask about. Around you, the Neanderthals are stretching, stirring, and beginning a ritual that feels familiar. Not religious exactly. Not spiritual in the way you might picture, but meaningful, grounded, and deliberate. You're about to step into the ancient pulse of Neanderthal ritual. Let's set the fire with a mainstream fact. Neanderthals buried their dead. Not always, not everywhere, but often enough to suggest it wasn't random. Graves with flexed limbs, bodies laid on their sides, sometimes surrounded by tools, bones, and possibly even flowers. It wasn't just disposal, it was goodbye. You don't see a burial today, but something's happening. A woman, older, not the elder, but respected, sits by a stone platform. She arranges objects around her, a smooth pebble, a strip of leather, the jawbone of a fox. You can't translate it, but you feel it. It's quiet reverence, not flashy, not ceremonial, just intentional. That's where the debate flares up like a spark in dry moss. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals had religion or just ritual. Did they believe in gods, Spirits? Afterlives? Or were their ceremonies more about emotion than dogma? You notice how the group behaves around the woman. Softened voices, slower steps, like entering a quiet room. One child brings her a leaf. She accepts it like it's priceless. A sacred offering from grubby little fingers. Now here's your quirky bit of wonder. Some Neanderthal sites suggest the presence of pigment use. Red ochre smeared on bones, or on cave walls, or maybe even skin. Was it symbolic? Decorative? Part of a ritual? We don't know. But if you've ever smeared on body paint at a music festival or war paint before a football game, you know exactly how it feels to become more than yourself. Someone nearby is humming again. The same tune from the other night. This time, they've tied it to movement, rocking gently back and forth, arms extended. A few others join. It's not coordinated. It's not a religion, but it is a rhythm, a pattern, an honoring. And let's drop a soft joke in here. You've got a calendar filled with yoga classes, moon ceremonies, and manifesting Mondays. They've got a fox jawbone and a stare that says, "I've outlived glaciers." Who's more spiritually grounded? You watch as one of the young Neanderthals mimics the elders' movement, but adds a spin, a laugh, a wild twirl. The others smile. Ritual doesn't mean rigid. It can shift like smoke, repeat like breath. Historians are still chasing one particular mystery: the presence of stacked cave bear skulls in certain sites. Were they trophies? An offering? Art? It's one of the more contested interpretations in paleoanthropology. But if true, it suggests reverence, perhaps even worship. You're pulled into that theory now as the group gathers around a small stone pile. One of them adds a feather, another a carved bone with notches. There's no sermon, no scripture, just a feeling that this matters. Someone gestures for you to add something. You panic for a second. What do you even have? You dig into your pouch and find a shard of stone from that first campfire, the one where you laughed at your clumsy fingers. You place it gently on the pile. A few heads nod. One murmurs something you don't understand, but it warms your chest anyway. Acceptance. And now, let's go full speculative fringe for a moment. A few researchers believe Neanderthals may have engaged in shamanistic behavior, altered states of consciousness induced by ritual, rhythm, or even natural hallucinogens. Some mushroom species were native to Europe at the time, after all. You glance at a nearby Neanderthal, who's been sitting completely still for over an hour, eyes closed, face tilted to the sun, maybe meditating, maybe just napping hard. But it raises the question, how much of ritual is about the divine, and how much is about getting still enough to feel human? The camp quiets again as the fire burns low. A child curls up in a fur wrap, still clutching their feather. The older woman begins to chant softly, not for an audience, but for the earth, maybe, or the sky, or someone she lost long ago. Your eyelids droop. You've watched them hunt, build, laugh, migrate, and play. But this moment is something quieter, something closer to the soul. As you fall asleep beside them, your hand still lightly touching that offering stone, you wonder, maybe the divine wasn't some faraway god. Maybe it was always each other, a shared silence, a chosen gesture, a feather on a rock. And maybe that's enough. The dawn creeps in slowly, spilling pale light over a world still tangled in frost and dreams. You rise with the Neanderthals, who move quietly, each step deliberate but softened by the lingering haze of sleep. Today feels different, though. You sense a closing of a chapter, like the end of a long story whispered through the ages. Just for you. You follow the group as they prepare to set out again. But this time there's a weight in their eyes. Not sorrow, but something like respect. For the land, for each other, for the journey itself. Here's your mainstream fact. Neanderthals adapted to some of the coldest periods in Earth's history, surviving ice ages that reshaped continents and challenged every instinct. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving in places where humans later struggled. Their bodies, stocky and strong, conserved heat, Their brains, large and complex, crafted tools and strategies that rivaled early Homo sapiens. But now, the quirky detail. Recent research suggests Neanderthals had the capacity for symbolic thought, not just practical problem solving. They may have created jewelry, like eagle talon necklaces, that weren't necessary for survival, but served as social signals. Ancient fashion statements, if you will. They had style, swagger, and a sense of identity. Historians and scientists still argue whether Neanderthals simply vanished, were outcompeted, or merged into our own lineage through interbreeding. The DNA you carry inside you, a quiet echo of their existence. You're part Neanderthal now, carrying their legacy forward, unknowingly. You watch as the group moves toward a ridge, the sun hitting their backs, casting long shadows that stretch like time itself. One of the younger ones pauses, looking back at the cave where you first met them. A silent farewell, or a promise to return? You smile softly, because you know the story isn't over. It just changed chapters. A soft joke to end the night. You, with your apps and streaming playlists, carry a bit of Neanderthal grit in your genes. So next time you're stuck in traffic, just remember, your ancestors survived glaciers without GPS. Beat that. The journey back is quiet but warm. The bond between you and the Neanderthals, sealed in the shared rhythm of footsteps and breath. You carry their story now, a flicker in your mind, ready to ignite in dreams. Now, as the fire dwindles and the world softens into night, let your body relax. Feel the pulse slow, the muscles loosen, and the mind drift. Remember, the Neanderthals weren't just relics of a distant past. They were fierce, clever, playful, and deeply human. They are part of you. And as you close your eyes, you carry a whisper from them, a lullaby sung through time. Sleep well. Now, let your breathing deepen, slow to the rhythm of a calm river flowing gently through the night. Imagine the soft crunch of leaves beneath your feet, the warmth of a fading fire, and the quiet companionship of those ancient travelers beside you. You are safe here. The world is vast, yes, but the stories you carry within you are older, wiser, and stronger. In this moment, you can release the day's worries like smoke drifting upward, light and easy, unburdened. Feel the heaviness leave your limbs, replaced by a soothing calm that settles over your skin like a soft blanket. The stars outside twinkle softly, distant but steady, and in their light, you find a sense of peace that transcends time. Remember that the fierce endurance of the Neanderthals is not just a tale of survival. It's a whisper of resilience, connection, and quiet joy. Their footsteps echo in your heart, reminding you that even in the darkest times, there is warmth, laughter, ritual, and the simple pleasure of being together. As you drift deeper, imagine the wind brushing gently through trees, carrying stories of old, folding you into a dreamscape where history and hope intertwine. You are part of this vast, ongoing story, human and wild, fragile and strong. So let yourself sink into sleep with ease. Tomorrow is another day, but tonight you rest in the company of ancient friends. Good night and sweet dreams.